When Aussie business owners think about selling their business, profit and loss is probably the number one thing that they think of in terms of driving the valuation up. But what if I told you that there are many other ways that you can enhance the valuation of your business to get an extraordinary outcome with your business sale? Today, Simon Youlton and I are going to discuss all of the different levers that you can pull to increase the valuation, things that buyers of great Australian businesses are looking for today beyond the balance sheet and beyond your profitability. So without further ado, here we are, Kathryn and Simon from the headquarters, talking about how you can increase your valuation in your business outside of your profit. All right, Simon. So what makes a company valuable beyond profitability? So we all know that to sell a company, we obviously want it to be as profitable as possible. But what are some of the things that buyers really look for beyond profitability?
Yeah, Kathryn, it's a good question, and it's probably one of my favourite topics. Reason being, it's often overlooked. Okay, so profit, if we think about profit, it tells a buyer or potential buyer where the business has been. So the situation thereafter, once they've looked at where it's been, so it's almost like a chapter of a book, if you think about a story, there's no guarantee the business is going to continue going in the same direction that it has been. Okay, so they're looking at two things, two key words to summarise beyond profit. They're looking at sustainability, and ultimately sustainability really to them means risk. So is the business going to continue being as profitable as it has been over the past few years? Is it going to continue on the same journey? So they turn their attention to what I call beyond profit, beyond balance sheet attributes that enhance the valuation, or as we see in a lot of cases, particularly when we begin working with businesses where they've had a transaction that's potentially failed, for example, so they've been through due diligence, and then the sort of numbers get discussed and they're revised downwards. And that's because it's not necessarily sustainable for that profit to continue. So off balance sheet items is what I really believe buyers are looking at.
I totally agree with you. I think, everyone's so focused on the financials that they often forget about the other things that can equally bump up, or as you so beautifully said, bump down the value of a company. So let's break them down, the major ones. I know there's one particularly, I hear you talk about this with our Australian clients all the time. So almost the first thing that I hear you talk about outside financials, and that's about people. Let's break down, if you could, what makes a company valuable when it comes to their people.
People, and you would hear this all the time, Kathryn, which is why you'll hear it again now. You can't buy people, okay? Potentially, you can try and outbid to pay someone a higher compensation package and so on. But really, when you get to the nuts and bolts of it, you can't buy people, okay? So if you've got good people in your organisation, your business, it doesn't matter how big, how small, that is often your advantage, okay? If you've got those people working together create a team, and a team creates the culture. When buyers are looking at purchasing a business or investing, whatever stage that they're looking to get involved at, they're not merely looking for a team of employees. They're looking for a team, okay? So they're not looking for just employees. They can hire employees themselves. They're looking for a team. They're looking for that culture, and that's where people can add the real value. Okay, so that is a major positive. It's also, though, the hardest thing to nurture, because you're not dealing with machine and equipment and stock and IP, so to speak. You're dealing with humans. And we all know dealing with humans, how difficult that can be. So it really takes nurturing. It takes time. It takes effort. And that for us is where we see a real added advantage when you're comparing one business against another business.
Absolutely. And, you have employees, but what makes an employee or that team really valuable? What are investors looking for? And how could people who are maybe thinking about selling sometime in the next 5 years increase that team culture so that it makes it even more valuable to a potential buyer?
So it goes deeper than just the individuals. So one of the key red flags is owner dependency. So where you've got staff, again, I hate using that word, I hate using that word, but where you have staff employees in a business where they're constantly deferring to the owner. That's a big red flag for potential buyers, because if the owner's not around, will the business collapse in a heap? Will the profit that's been there before continue? So that's a big risk. So having employees that are able to really think for themselves, but also beyond their role. So that's a real key thing. So when you look at people, they may be doing their role really efficiently, but do they understand and have a good understanding of other functions within the business? Okay, so that would start to tell a prospective acquirer if the business has a really well-established team. And it also is a big factor in managing change if you have people within the business that have a broader view of how the business functions, and this is beyond their existing role. So that's what I mean when I talk about the value adds with employees. And you'll naturally find those that have that will be less inclined to defer constantly to the owner, which we see as a real weakness when we're looking at businesses.
Yeah, totally. And well, it's also a weakness for the owner if they want some freedom in their lives. So getting that sorted out, regardless of whether you're wanting to sell or not, is a really big priority, I would have thought. What are some of the practical things? You've been through a lot of acquisitions. What are some of the practical things that great businesses are doing to lock in the great team and also make it super valuable and attractive to the next buyer?
Yeah, so there is a common theme, which is good, because it means that all businesses can really do this. And again, I'll keep saying this, it doesn't matter if you're big or small. I have a favourite phrase actually, and I always say, think big when you're small, because when you become big, if you're still thinking small, it's a big problem for you. What you'll find with businesses that do it really well, so some of the questions that you might get asked when you're having conversations around a potential acquirer might ask you is how you onboard staff. So it starts at the very beginning. So do you have a really well-defined induction program? So when staff come into the business, new employees, are they really given the time that's deserved to be able to understand what the business does, who the key people in the business are? That starts to show that you're setting the culture of the business very early on. You then have how the staff are mentored during their journey. So how these employees have an opportunity to be promoted, to take on additional responsibilities, how they're developed. Okay, that's a crucial one as well. You can't just put somebody in a role and just leave them there. People also have aspirations. They want to move into new roles, learn new skills. So they'll look at all of that. Retention, that's a key metric that's used all the time. A lot of businesses we speak to would sort of tell me that their employees have been there for a long period of time, and they'll start quoting numbers, but that needs to be really well defined. And then the next question after that is, how often do these individuals in the business move into new roles? So how often are you internally promoted? That's really key, because again, that shows that you're able to mentor and bring people through and develop skills in the business. And this again is what creates that view that the business is more than just a bunch of employees that are working together.
I think they're really good practical steps and great guidelines for any business, whether you're looking to exit or not. Okay, let's move to another one of those intangible things that the buyers might be looking for beyond profit. One of the big things is customer relationships, right? Client relationships, customer relationships, how many there are, how dependent you are on, particular whale accounts, for example. Could you talk me through a little bit some of the things that you're looking for as a buyer that might help people to understand what makes a business either contract or expand in value based on those customer relationships?
Yeah, sure. And there is a lot of, businesses we've been involved in where they've been trying to get to a point where they can have an exit that is an exit in the form of a sale. And so we've seen this in real life. And, we had a marketing agency over in Melbourne not so long ago, hugely profitable, but 70% of all the revenue was attached to the owner. Okay, so he had the key accounts. That essentially gives you a real negative when it comes to being in that position of an exit. Okay, if you have a business where you've got a really broad base of clients and revenue is not concentrated just to a key few number of clients, that is a massive value add. Because again, that word I used at the beginning, sustainability risk, it's key. It manages the risk, it reduces the risk. If the owner is not around, the business still functions. So we see client concentration as a real key driver for either moving that value up or down, and considerably as well, Kathryn.
Yeah, and I totally get it as someone who runs an agency as well, that you have your whale clients and they want to be serviced by the owner or the most senior person in the company. I totally understand that. However, it's going to contract down the sale price and make it very, very risky for someone to take that company on. So what are some of the things that you could do to remove yourself from those relationships while also protecting the revenue of the company?
Yeah. So look, the key here is you'll often find that the reason it doesn't happen is probably a good space to start. There's a lot of distrust in businesses, and we see that a lot. And the owner, and we've had this conversation before on previous videos we've done. You see the owner try to hold on to lots of things, and they're very precious over these relationships. And often, they've nurtured them from infancy right through to the stage they're at. And so they're very reluctant to hand over. If you can start to build, a team where you have one or two key people in the business, you involve them in some of these meetings, you bring them along to client sessions, you start to create that internal structure where you're discussing key accounts. So the client themselves feel that they have more than just the owner to turn to. And this has got many positives, not just for when you get to the point of explaining how you're managing the risk of this client concentration to a potential buyer. But as a business owner, you can go on holiday, you can do all of these things, you can step out of the business and you don't have to worry. We find this reluctance to hand over is a real, almost like I call it like a ball and chain. It really can drag you down. But before you do that, completely appreciate it. And I've been in the same position. You've got to be confident that the person you're handing over to is able to handle what you're about to give them. And this is where the mentoring and the development and all of this comes in. And then deeper than that, making sure contractually you've got the right things in place that this person doesn't, leave your business and take key clients with them. So there's a lot of steps to jump through, but again, we see that as a really good place to focus your efforts on if you want to maximize value in your business.
Yeah, 100%. And so one of the things that you and I have focused on a lot in the conversation, I hope you're hearing this over and over from us, is patience in this process. So even if you're like, oh man, I want to sell, if you can just be a little patient and get these things lined up, which, might just be a 12-month process, then the maximum value is available to you versus if you're rushing in and these things are just not set in stone. Would you agree?
I would. It's the thing. How do I put it politely? Patience. It's I've been from my own experience, I've been impatient. I think by the very nature of entrepreneurs, which let's face it, most of the business owners are, particularly the ones at headquarters that we work with, they're naturally impatient, because that's how they got into business in the first place. And you have to be quick, and you have to make decisions fast, and you have to react to changing environments quickly too. So you don't have the privilege always of being patient. So when you're hearing from us, be patient, it almost can feel a little foreign. But the truth is, you do have to be patient. People are your competitive advantage. They're your real value, and you've got access to all the information, and you're often a visionary, and you know exactly where you're heading with the business. That's not necessarily known by your entire team. Okay, so they take a little bit longer to catch up in the process, and that's why you have to be patient. You have to be patient with them. You have to let things bed in, and see what changes are resulting from that, and then probably adapt and go again. So there is patience. It's not something that everything we talk about, there's no quick wins. There are some wins that you will see quicker than others. But, the reality is there's effort and there's patience that's required. to do, if you really want to drive the value of your business in the direction that most people do, which is up.
Yeah, we all want the business value to go up. I think we can agree on that. So, okay, another key relationship that I didn't mention before, which is on the other side, is vendor relationships, supplier relationships. That too can be a real risk for a buyer. If you're reliant on just one supplier, there's an element obviously of risk in that relationship. Can you talk me through a little bit what that can do for the sale price up and down, and some tactical things that people might do to elevate their sale price?
Yeah. Look, if I was trying to explain this, and I were, to people and businesses pre-2020, it was very difficult because we had never seen what we saw between 2020 and 2022, which was COVID. And that really, and particularly for businesses that operated internationally, but we saw it in Australia interstate because we had borders within borders, okay, closed. So you saw mass disruption of supply chain, and it was forced in a lot of cases through government intervention. But it really highlighted the issues with being dependent on a particular supplier. And I think that it's now easier for us to use that as an example to say, perhaps nothing of that scale we hope won't happen again, but we see supply disruption in other forms frequently. So every business should have a plan B, okay? It doesn't make your business more valuable in most cases if you are talking to a buyer and you've got, one key supplier, you're really dependent on them. It's not normally seen as a positive. It's, you can have contracts and all sorts of things like that. But what acquirers want to see is the ability for the business to function in the event of a plan B being required. Because that's what they want to see. They want to see contracts in place, not handshakes. And most of the long contracts you see in businesses, they're formed from handshakes. Again, I've had the same scenario, and they're often really good, but they're again owner dependent, which is what we talk about as a big weakness. So looking at your supply chain, having your plan B, making sure your contracts are proper contracts, and also having again that second person in position that's able to run with that contract if the owner is not around, because ultimately they won't be one day.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, now I'm going to go to the one that everyone just groans at us when we start talking about this, which is all about systems and processes. It's not the creative, fun part of business, but it is in fact something beyond the profitability that buyers are looking for every day of the week. They want reliable systems and processes, so it's a plug and play. So Simon, can you maybe talk a little bit to what people are actually looking for, their acquirers are really looking for there, and how can businesses prepare themselves for that so that they're really in a position to get that highest value?
So look, in a lot of cases, businesses acquire businesses that are smaller than them. Okay, that's pretty obvious, and sometimes they can be considerably smaller. So you may be running a smaller business than someone that's about to acquire you. By that, just that distinction, what you'll often find is bigger businesses are very systems and process orientated. Okay, and some people say, well, I won't sell to a bigger business. Well, then the problem presents itself as to who's going to buy you for the price that you want. Now, so it's not always a bigger business, but in a lot of cases it is. At the very least, it's always a business that can afford typically to acquire you, so they must be doing something right. So systems and processes, particularly now in the era we're in with AI and everything else that's now in the world that wasn't here 10 years ago, is more and more important. Okay, the way we manage client relationships goes beyond humans now. So there's some form of technology, CRM systems, the way we manage our online presence and so on. There's a whole load of other things now we have to think about that we didn't have to even just 10 years ago. Okay, so somebody acquiring a business wants to acquire a business that they understand, that they can integrate into a bigger business relatively easy. So there is a value purely on that basis as to how easy the business is to integrate into their bigger business, which is normally what they would want to do, if not immediately, but over time. Again, having systems and processes, it shows the business is not just dependent on the owner. And most importantly, it's not all in one person's head. So things are written down, documented, and if the worst would happen, somebody could step in somebody else's shoes and continue that function.
Yeah, and again, it's just sage advice for running a business anyway, even if you're not preparing to exit, is having all of these processes in place for just, you and I have been around for long enough to know many, many people, unfortunately, that have run into a health crisis or some unfortunate event where they've just had to step back. And having all of that ready is just absolutely foundationally imperative to making sure that the business can continue on without them, even if they're not looking to sell. So I wonder beyond that, there's this question of you've already spoken about contracts and those sorts of things. From a legal perspective, there's another thing that I often hear bandied around, and it's misinterpreted, I think, by small businesses, and that's around IP. How do small businesses protect IP? What does it really mean? And how important is that to the sales price as well?
Yeah, so look, there's varying forms of IP. I think that clearly, there's not a contract that you can structure that's going to give you 100% certainty that IP is not going to disappear from your business at some point. Unfortunately, we just have to be realistic that's just the world we live in. And IP now, it means lots of different things. So it was a lot easier to determine what IP was a few years ago, but now it's really quite difficult. The key is really making sure your employees and your staff, your team, want to remain in the business and want to stay in the business. That's your best form of protection. If people aren't leaving the business because you're doing a very good job to keep them there, that's your biggest defense against losing IP. Clearly, though, what we would always advocate, and we spend a lot of time on this, particularly at the headquarters, is establishing that core team that's able to work together to really ensure the key processes, and that is IP as well. Your how do things function, how do you do things, is documented, is able to be picked up by a new owner or a new staff member, and and it can be business as usual. The challenge is when you look at your business, particularly if you've been going for a long time and people have been in the business a long time, and we used to view this as a strength when people would come and they would say, I've been running the business for 20 years. Most of my staff have been here 10 years. And then when you start asking, well, how do they do this? How do they do that? No one really kind of knows because the processes are not formalized as such. So getting that out of the head into a easy to understand process manual of some description starts to become really important IP. And then obviously training other people to job shadow, for example, we encourage that a lot, to shadow somebody else so that you are able to retain that IP and that way of doing things if somebody does leave the business. But that can be a real daunting task, Kathryn, because it's trying to understand how the business is doing what it's doing is actually harder than you think. But there is a streamlined process of being able to do it, and we spend a lot of time trying to do that. It can be quite overwhelming.
Yeah, and I think there's a very specific type of business as well that we often run into where they've got perhaps unique methodology or they've got a unique way of doing something. Beyond the process, you might also really like to look at protection of that IP or the methodology, particularly if it's proprietary. We work with a lot of education companies, a lot of marketing companies, a lot of strategy companies, consulting companies, where they're using some unique service. And so looking at trademarking, looking at protecting the copyright, making sure that you've got all of your ducks in a row is, again, this is just good business advice. We get so excited about the creativity of running a business sometimes that, slowing down and crossing the T's and dotting the I's can oftentimes be a bit boring, but so important. Do you have anything to add to that for those types of businesses, Simon?
Yeah, I do. And depending on the business, it's very different. And the sector is key too. So we obviously spend a lot of time working with other professionals that we bring in from time to time to assist with that, to really make sure that that other IP and that other, advantage that the business has is protected, because it's a real complex area. And we have spent a lot of time, today talking about the quicker wins, which is the things you can do yourself, the processes and so on. But it's, a lot of people develop their own CRM systems, and that itself becomes, IP. And particularly if it's resulting in the end-to-end client management and so on. So there's a whole load of things. And to protect that is very different from protecting a patent that you might have. So there is a need to really understand the IP, and that's, we really do need to deep dive into the business to understand that, and then make sure we've got the right team to be able to protect that as best we can. But again, I'll keep coming back to the fundamental part. It's about making sure that the team you're working with, your internal, your staff, your employees, making sure that they're across the business more broadly and really incentivized to remain in the business. That is always your biggest form of defense. There's no other alternative way of thinking about. Start there, and that's your first line of defense.
I love that way of thinking. So good. And that's given me the most beautiful segue. I mean, you've peppered this in the whole way through. This, the final thing that really makes a business incredibly valuable to a buyer is the fact that the owner can extricate themselves from the business, and the business continues to not just, exist, but thrive and grow and remain profitable and all of those things. Can you talk us through maybe some examples of the best businesses and how they achieved that, and maybe some tactical things again that people might be able to implement for their businesses starting now?
So look, as a business owner, you wear many hats. So it's not uncommon for us to ask the question when we're looking at the org chart, okay? And let's start there. So, can I see the organisational chart? Most businesses, they won't have one. Okay, or a lot of businesses won't have one. Those that do could be quite small, could be quite big, depending on the size of the business. But what you'll typically find, what we find, is most business owners are wearing lots of hats that you would expect to see on somebody else's head in an organisational chart. So they're the CEO, the CFO, the business developer, the marketing manager, the sales manager, the supervisor. They literally are absolutely everything, and in a lot of cases probably still the cleaner, and on making sure that everything's fit and ready for the next day. And I say that in all honesty, it's what I often see. I mean, there's so many roles. The thing with that is lines get blurred, and you can often just through your own intuition and your own rhythm, you start to just do things and you strain across into all different types of areas without actually, stopping, checking, and being able to reflect on that particular decision, because you know so much about the business, you blur into these other areas. That becomes very difficult when a bigger business is looking at you, because they will often take functions away and give functions elsewhere. Like HR might be dealt with external HR, marketing, external marketing. If you're doing all of these things, it's all very intertwined. It can become very difficult to understand. So one of the things that I like to do is to get people to understand what hats they're wearing and why they're wearing them, and look within the business to see, is there an opportunity to perhaps safely and on a temporary basis, a trial basis, whatever it may be, safely hand over that hat to somebody else for them to be able to try on. Obviously, you do this in a way where you're still able to control should anything go drastically wrong. But you perhaps look to that. And when you ask Kathryn about success, I can think of numerous businesses where we have had business owners, and I can think of one off the top of my head now, which was an engineering business. It was run by two people, and they made all the decisions. They had about 15 staff, but they made all of the key decisions, and they held between them all of the roles. They were wearing all of the hats. And I don't think either of them at any one time knew who was wearing which hat of the two of them, but they were essentially the key decision makers. And getting them to create a very small team, which we called their leadership management team, and I do this with a lot of businesses, allowed them to hand over some of those responsibilities. So they started to create this management team structure. And people didn't all of a sudden leave their main roles, and we didn't create a bureaucratic business or anything here. We just created a business where some of the responsibilities were shared in a safe way. And they would meet weekly, they would create actions, all the meetings were minuted, and it just kept people accountable. And it created that confidence within the business that you can hand things over, and it's okay to do so because you're going to be closely monitoring it. And next week, if you need to make any changes, you can do. That was a massive value add. And that particular business did sell, and it sold for, well, over 2 times what it was expected to sell for based on competitor businesses, purely because the acquirer could see they could integrate it into a bigger business model much easier.
And that's the dream, right? That we walk away with a life-changing number. Because that's what you've worked for so long, and that's what you've earned. So I'm hoping that today has been incredibly valuable for everyone in thinking about what are those things beyond the bottom line, beyond the profit. But Simon, just to wrap things up, would love to hear from you maybe some of the things that buyers are really looking for right now in this market that people can do straight up. And I'm going to give a shameless plug to the headquarters, because if your unique circumstances, we can talk to you about your particular industry, your particular location, your particular value and all of those things. But I'd love to know from you, because you're dealing every day with buyers, sellers, the whole thing. What are people looking for right now that people can take action on immediately?
Yeah, so look, I think that the way I would answer that, and we've, as you know, Kathryn, we've gone through a process where we understand when people come to speak to us, they often have a plan that they want to execute quite quickly. Okay, not always, but they do. Sometimes that's not realistic. So, we'll be honest and explain that's not realistic. You need more patience. There's that key word again. And this is the kind of things we can work to do to get you to that particular point where you have options, which is really what we try to provide. What I would say, how we work through it at headquarters really well, is we use I call it an enhanced valuation index. Okay, so it's 8 different areas of a business that we actually look at to understand which of those 8 areas is going to drive the greatest value. Okay, so it's a very sort of straightforward process when we understand the business, because these value drivers are different for each business and each sector, and that will start to give you really quick wins. One of them is always owner dependency. And we've talked about that as a common theme in today's interview. But it means different things for different businesses. So my view there is you need to really understand the owner dependency and what you can do about it. And from there, build a clear roadmap that allows you to start lessening that, because that's going to be your major value driver in almost every case.
All right, Aussie business owners. So there are so many ways that you can increase the value of your business so that you can be bought for the biggest multiple, that biggest exit value that you can think about, way beyond the bottom line, way beyond your profitability. There are so many things that we spoke about today. Now, Simon and I at the headquarters, shameless plug, would love to speak with you about how we can help you to grow to sell. And there are 8 different levers that we can pull to help increase the valuation of your business. So if you would like to speak with us about your unique circumstances and what it is that you have in mind in terms of the valuation and the exit planning and all of the things that you think that you need to do to get there, then we would love to speak with you. All you need to do is head over to theheadquarters.com.au. That is theheadquarters.com.au. And you can read all about what we do at the headquarters, all about the background that Simon and I have in this area and how we help great Australian businesses prepare to sell at the highest possible valuation. All right, I will see you on next week's video. And if you're loving this content, you're an Australian business that really wants to grow and potentially sell at some stage, then keep following us here at the headquarters. Simon and I really enjoy these videos and providing you with as many resources as possible to help you to grow and exit. See you soon.